Are you ready to get casual? Grab your favorite adult beverage or combustible plant and join us for our roundtable TTRPG discussion. Oh yeah, it's time for Casual Friday. And now, here are your hosts.
And here we are. Hey,
Cheers.
What's up? We are the Landlocked Warlocks, and this is Casual Friday. Hey there, I am GM Jim Heskett from Wizards and Wordslingers, and over there is...
Brad Wolf from Diarden, and down there...
I'm Ryan Doyle, and I am a dinosaur.
Yeah,
coming through?
Ryan was
Oh, no.
very proud of you.
I'm also
proud of the thumbnail.
I also might be lagging.
Yes, Ryan, you are lagging a little bit. So last week, I was complaining to my co-host Brad about how there wasn't a lot going on in the news, and I was concerned about the show being too thin. Well, that all changed this week. There are a million bajillion news items for us to cover. We might not even get to it all. We might have to talk extra fast so you don't have to put us on 1.5 speed today. But we're going to talk about some new Shadow Dark stuff because we're required by law to have at least one non-WotC thing in every show. Mike Merles has been doing a bunch of interviews lately. We've talked about that on the show a few weeks ago, but he did a new interview this week that was incredibly revealing. We're going to discuss that a little bit. Something I thought was kind of cool, a Pathfinder actual play. And we could show everybody the trailer for that. There's some interesting things in the trailer, I think, that are quite unusual. We're going to talk about Project Sigil, Sigil. I'm going to say Sigil. Like Steven, Project Steven Seagal is now an open beta. Anyone who has a D&D Beyond account and a Windows PC can download it. And we're going to have a live demo of Seagull later, unless Ryan's computer crashes between now and then.
We're going to try. We're definitely going to try.
We're going to see how it goes. We're going to talk about the new Artificer and Eberron feats. Surprise UA just dropped like 2 days ago. New Artificer UA, new Artificer subclass, and a bunch of Dragon-marked feats for Eberron. We're going to talk about, possibly, if we have time, so we get later in the show, we're going to talk about the Monster Manual more. Tom Dunn, I don't know who that is, but there is we found a pretty interesting statistical analysis of some stuff in the Monster Manual that I think is worth talking about. I thought of a cool little encounter I'm going to talk about later. These guys don't know what that is. It's just in the agenda. It just appeared there. And after, I don't know what we're going to do after that, because we probably won't get to anything after this kind of stuff. And we might not even get to all that, because it is an action-packed friggin' show today. So let's get into it. The first thing we want to talk about is Shadow Dark is Kelsey Dion, the Arcane Library from Shadow Dark, is about to launch a new Kickstarter for a campaign setting called the Western Reaches. And now, Brad, you know a lot more about Shadow Dark than I do, but correct me if I'm wrong, the Shadow Dark book does not have a campaign in it, right? It doesn't have a setting in it.
Right. So far, she's been putting out the zines, which give you like campaign regions, right? There's like a desert themed one, a swamp themed one, or forest themed one, and like a Viking themed zine. So I think that's what those three colorful books are in that picture. She's supposed to have 3 new zines coming out. So it looks, I'm thinking, I haven't read the details into this Kickstarter yet, but I'm thinking you're going to get more zines, and then this West Reaches campaign setting, which is very interesting. The name makes me, think of West Marches, right? Like that, and then it says something about like you don't need to know all the campaign information beforehand. So you can discover details about the campaign along the way. That also sounds very West Marches style. So I'm curious to see what all is going into this. Kelsey's usually good about putting out some videos about her products. So I'm expecting that to pop up anytime now.
And we've got this list here of what looks like maybe new classes or maybe backgrounds or something we don't know. Witch, Knight, Monk, Explorer, Warrior, Scarred Pit Fighter. That's the only one. There's already a fighter in Shadow Dark, right? Isn't that the name of the class? Fighter?
Yeah, there's a fighter and there's a pit fighter class in one of the zines as well.
The desert one, probably?
Yeah, the Red Sands zine has a pit fighter class.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm curious. Well, and the Witch too. I think the Witch is already in one of the other zines too. So I'm wondering if some of this, like if the hardback book's going to have the classes from the other zines, and then there's going to be new zines coming out too. I'm not. I have not done a good job of paying attention to her Discord group lately. I'm sure if I had, I would have more answers to these questions.
Well, we don't know. I don't know when the Kickstarter is launching, but you can sign up on the Kickstarter if you want to get 4,327 followers. That's quite a lot.
March 11th. March 11th.
Okay, there you have it. March 11th is when that's going live. So if you are interested in that, I am interested in that. I don't play a lot of Shadow Dark, but I find that the way it's written, I just like reading the books because they are very eloquently and simply designed.
She is very good at giving you exactly what you want and clearing the path so that there's not a lot of crap in the way.
Yeah.
And her 5e adventures in the system. And I'm excited to see like a full-on sandbox from her. But that's kind of my steez. I love a good sandbox campaign.
So the next thing we want to talk about is that Mike Merles, former WotC indentured servant, has escaped, and some kind of NDA has recently lifted. This is the only thing we can surmise, that a series of NDAs possibly recently lifted because he's been on a world tour for the last month or so. He's been on every podcast, every video vlog, except for this one. Mike, you want to come on? We'll have you on. But he did a recent interview with it's Questing Beast, right? Ben Melton?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was a very long interview, and it was one of the Ben is a brilliant interview because he mostly just let Mike talk. He stayed out of the way, and Mike got a bit rambly, and it led to some really interesting insights. I've got a bunch of notes I wrote down, a bunch of quotes from the interview. The first thing he said I thought was really interesting was that 5th edition was designed for fans of WoW, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, and Skyrim. I don't know if that's just his hindsight opinion looking back on it, or if any of those were deliberate design goals, like appealing to fans of Skyrim and Game of Thrones. I've never heard those before out of anyone at WotC's mouth.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see like a Skyrim influence, especially like if you compare the dungeon design in like almost all of the starter boxes, right? The dungeons are significantly smaller, like bordering on like 5-room dungeon design, which is very similar to the dungeon design in Skyrim, right? Most of the dungeons in Skyrim are these short little, loops that you can get in and out of fairly quickly, right? There's a few that are attached to like the main storylines that are larger, more comprehensive dungeons that we're used to from earlier editions of D&D. But I could certainly see, Skyrim influences in the early 5e products for sure.
He said that when they were designing 5e, he said, if we fail, let's fail by being too accessible. Clearly feeling the weight of 4E's heavy design.
Right. Well, 4E and third, right? Third and 3.5 have, very heavy design to them as well. And third was, or 3.5 as a unit, those two were pretty popular, right? But he talked about that too. Like, didn't he say that, after the initial release, a lot of that, a lot of those sales really dropped off. That there wasn't a lot of staying power with 3.5.
Yeah.
Which was a very interesting point, because that was my experience. Like, I loved third when I first read it, and went out and bought 3.5 as soon as it came out, but we never played it enough, right? We never like really stuck with it, and so I definitely experienced that, like, not feeling the staying power of 3.5.
Yeah. One thing I really like is Mike Merles calls it 5.5.
And
I was
points
happy
out that
about
it
that.
should have a name.
Yeah, he said that. He said, they don't even know what to call it. Which felt, that was a dig. That was definitely a dig. He said 5.5 has you doing, quote, has you too much, quote, doing math in your head. Too focused on the rules. He said it's too much like 3.5 or 4th edition. He said it's more like those editions than 5.5. I don't know if I feel it's that intensely crunchy compared to older editions, but I think he's right that it does have you doing more math in your head.
Yeah, I agree. The reason I liked 5th edition was because it did feel more like the 1st and 2nd edition that I grew up on. So, I didn't feel the crunch in 5e the way I did with 3 and 4.
I found it all very interesting, just his historical perspective, or like parting the curtains of like, well, 4th edition didn't work, and we thought this was going to be the last version of D&D, not because it's one D&D to rule them all, but because we might not be making D&D anymore pretty soon because the sales aren't there, and we can't make 4th edition. We know that didn't work, and we can't really go back to 3.5 because Paizo captured that market. So we have to make something new that's going to bring new people in, and maybe get those people who were playing 20 years ago in. And lo and behold, they did that. Painted into a corner. Like, the fact that it was a failing company actually like helped them do something great. Whereas fast forward 10 years, the opposite situation where they were afraid to change enough. They're afraid to be innovative enough because they don't want to lose what they have. And they make, I mean, it's an improvement, but they made a mediocre project that like no one's too pumped about.
No, that's
Yeah.
great. That's a great point. Like, they were kind of like the whole necessity is the mother of invention thing, right? So the way Mike described it is they were kind of painted into a corner, like they're backed into a corner with 5e. Like, what are we going to do? We can't make it like 4. We can't make it like 3 because Pathfinder's already done that. So, how do we come out of this corner? Well, you got to come out swinging. You got to do something. Be creative, be innovative. And I think history has shown that 5e was a better product because they had to, take a stand on, all right, what is this game going to be?
And I think he said something that really interested me. He said each successive edition cared less about making the entry point fun. Like he said, 3rd edition is great if you already like D&D. There were several things he said throughout the interview that gave me the impression that he really cares about the newcomer experience. He's very concerned about the newcomer experience to tabletop RPGs, and I think he's right about that with D&D. That like if you like 3rd edition, there's a chance you like 4th edition. If you've never seen any D&D at all, 4th edition wouldn't be the one you'd pick, right? Or 3rd edition, or 3.5, or basically anything except for 5th edition or some of the early simpler editions. But he talked a lot about. He said newcomers like, what did he say? New players like the essence of things. That was a quote that stuck with me, because he said that new players want to get to the fun quickly. They're not as interested in the crunch of it. They want to get to the essence of it. What's the fun part? What are we trying to do here at this table? I found that very interesting and refreshing to hear. Because with all the 5.5 stuff, it's all just been about, here's new features, there's more crunch, you're getting all this additional stuff. Are you people happy yet?
Yeah. Well, and Nacho makes another good point that it's that's relevant here, is that they did play test the heck out of 5e, right? Like the the D&D Next playtest was pretty extensive. But the other thing Mike mentioned, talking about like when they were looking for what is it our fans want, right? So the playtest accomplished some of that. Like we actually put it in front of fans, see what they think, get their feedback. The other thing is they went back and looked at sales, right? He said they went back and, were surprised to find out that the rules cyclopedia, which is the Beckme version, was still selling really well, right? That the old downloads of rules cyclopedia were a constant seller, and that was, I think, was another tip in the direction of let's streamline this, let's make things easier and more accessible, because there was value to those, the BX and the Beckme editions.
And they're still wildly popular. Like I played Old School Essentials the other night, and like it's basically a cleaned up version of all of that. And ooh, do I love it! Dungeon Crawl Classics. There's a ton of that's a whole OSR, right? Is built on those retro clones and has evolved from there. And the other thing he said that really, like, I hope that somebody heard at WotC is that they're sitting in some ivory tower somewhere or whatever, some dark crystal pinnacle in Seattle or slightly outside in some boardroom, and they're seeing the gap between them and the number 2 guy, and the gap between them and the number 3 guy is so much more. And what Merle said is, you don't understand. It's not you versus Paizo. It's you versus everybody who's not you. And I think that was valid before they made a bunch of choices that vilified themselves. And now it's even more true. And I don't, based on their actions, I don't think Wizards thinks like that, or whatever corporate arm of Hasbro is controlling Wizards policy. Yep. Clearly doesn't think like that. Doesn't realize the threat that, like, oh, okay, this little upstart company's 1% compared to what you are. There's 1,000 of those companies.
Mm-hmm.
And you spawned, and they used to work with you, and now they're working against you because of your greed.
Yeah, I wrote down this quote. Is there anyone at Wizards who wakes up in the morning and thinks, how can I make the tabletop role-playing game better? I don't think so. Or they're so far down the org chart they have no power. Ouch. And this other one, he talked a bit about, he addressed one of the big concerns a lot of people are having with the Monster Manual is the removal of the lore. And he would reference the he said Spelljammer, but I think he was referencing the Hadesy incident. And he said that after they kept screwing up, they said, we don't know what the audience wants, and we don't want the audience to get upset. So what if we just say nothing? And that's led to the wholesale, burning of lore out of a lot of these things. And I can see that. I could see a conversation like that actually kind of happening. Like, we keep putting our foot in our mouth. Maybe we should just stand still for a while. I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, to answer Twin Seal's question, what's the corporate speak for the lack of knowledge, the institutional knowledge? That's the phrase you're looking for, Twin Seal. And there does seem to be a significant lack of institutional knowledge at WotC, because it sure seems like they keep repeating the same mistakes, right? Yeah. It was I mean, Mike even talked about the really strict version of the gaming license that they came out with at 4th edition. And that's what created Paizo, right? I mean, well, not created Paizo, but that's what led to Paizo creating Pathfinder, right? When they realized that, hey, they've turned against us. Here we are making all these products for 3.5, and now they're moving on to a new edition, and they're trying to leave us in the dust. Well, we need to make a game that supports all the products we've been making for the last several years, and introduce Pathfinder. And now, they've made the same mistake, creating the OGL debacle, and now MCDM and Critical Role. They're all making their own games.
Yeah, we opened the show talking about Shadow Dark.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
Right.
coming anyway, but it wouldn't be what it is now.
No, like I mean, I've talked to Kelsey briefly on this subject, and she's very aware that like as much as the OGL debacle sent her into crisis mode, like like because her Kickstarter was about to launch when all this stuff went down, and she was like, "Do I have to go in and scrub my books of all this, of all this WotC related, terminology?" And so she was actually working on, like frantically working to revamp Shadow Dark. So it was a huge ordeal for her to go through. But the end result, though, is with everything going into Creative Commons and the OGL stuff settling down, she was able to release her original vision of the game. But then on top of that, like clearly Shadow Dark did really well because people were ready for something not WotC related.
One of my favorite memes from 2023 was when they capitulated and said, "Okay, we're putting everything into that new SRD." Right. One of my favorite memes was a social media post that said, "That sound you hear is a million erasers changing agility back to dexterity."
Gang.
That's
I
pretty
mean,
funny.
actually, a lot of people in chat right now and on the screen can appreciate like editing a 3-page project that you're gonna like put out into the public is a task and stressful. Editing a book, crazy stressful. Editing a book for legal reasons, I can't even imagine. Terrifying.
Yeah.
100%. So we could probably talk about this interview and our thoughts on Mike Mearls for another 45 minutes, but we have a lot to get to today. We have way too much stuff to get to. So unless anybody has a killer button for this segment, we'll go ahead and move on.
Well, the only thing I would say is, we do have to be careful. While it's neat to hear Mike talk about the history of D&D, and it's cool to have a lot of our feelings validated, just, to be, kind of balanced here in the discussion, Mike is a ex-employee who now works for another company and is making his own game. So while we might agree with a lot of his criticisms, that's probably fair to put that qualifier out there that he also has his own motive behind all these interviews he's doing. He's getting his face back out there. He's rebuilding his brand, and he's going to be selling his own game soon.
Yep, well said. So the next thing we're going to talk about is I saw this popped up on my YouTubes, a very interesting trailer for a new actual play. I think it's a one-shot. You see there's a charity benefiting Extra Life, but there's a bunch of stuff here. We don't care about the minis, but we're going to skip forward to some of the more interesting stuff. This is a one-shot that features Felicia Day, also Deborah Ann Wall. You just saw Matt Mercer there, and Reggie Watts, which is pretty cool. And then the most interesting thing here, this is a Pathfinder one-shot. Like they're doing a charity, and you see, look, they're putting on MetaQuest headsets. Are those? I don't know. There's a VR component to this one shot. It says for the first time ever, you're at the table. I'm kind of curious what I don't approve of using VR in Dungeons and Dragons, but I'm very curious to see what this is. Like, how can they have a VR component here? Are we going to be able to watch this in VR at some point? Are we just going to watch people put VR headsets on their faces at the table?
What
do you think about this?
I wonder if this could be a cool way to do like establishing shots and cutscenes, right? Like instead of you arrive at the village, insert text box here. When they arrive at a location, they stick on the VR headset and then they can look around and like see the village, see the people in the village, get a feel for the landscape. Then you take your headset off and all right, what does your character do? I don't know.
Varping.
Varping.
Yeah, you can workshop it with steel. That's not we know that's not your final.
Flarping? Is that something?
Vlarping. So that's Lost Odyssey Godfall. And another thing that's interesting is it's on Geek and Sundry, where we haven't seen Matt Mercer on Geek and Sundry in a while, I don't think. Anyway, any other thoughts on that? I'm kind of psyched that there's a Pathfinder actual play done by celebrities. You don't usually see that, right? It's either 5e or nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious to see where they go with this headset thing. How does this factor into, the tabletop experience?
And hey, you know what? You out there watching this right now, if you are subscribed to the Landlocked Warlocks YouTube channel, thank you. If you're not subscribed to the Landlocked Warlocks YouTube channel, what are you doing? Subscribe. Right?
Yeah, get in now. Like up and coming, one of the best, podcasts out there about the TTRPG industry.
You really want to get in on the ground floor. You don't want to be subscriber 101,875. You want to be in there so you could be one of the first, one of the core. Really, now's your chance.
Yeah.
Comment like on that subscribe bell. That's what Twins. Okay, hey, you probably just saw a little teaser there when the screen was shared for just a moment, but we're gonna now take a live look at Project Sigil. Ryan has the most experience with this out of any of us. He has about 10 more minutes of experience compared to me and Brad's 0 minutes of experience. So you ready to share, Ryan?
Yes. Tell me if my computer explodes. I'll be the last to know. So first impression, it's straight up a video game. My setup is built to play a video game or stream, not do both at once. So sorry for my presentation here, but it's pretty dope. I kind of hate the fact that it's this good. Overhead view.
So this was all default stuff that was already here, right? You didn't build any of this, right?
Correct. So I did mess around for like an hour or so trying to build stuff. Fairly intuitive, fairly limited. I can definitely see them selling us stuff. This is actually an adventure that came for free. The Bald Boar, spoilers. Sorry for anyone who wants to play this. I can actually go in and edit this text. There's markup. I got read aloud here. It's telling me what the situation is in this thing. And as you go, it tells you, okay, go to the next level. So minis, everyone's going to select their guy. So we got pre-gen characters. Clicking on one, I can claim them. And then boom, here are my stats. I can roll. Let me zoom out. I can roll. And it happens right on the table. He rolled poorly.
Does
Par for the
that
course.
look different than D&D Beyond's dice roller? Is it a different? I can't tell from the from here.
So this is the generic one. I mean, I can add modifiers to this. I mean, it's different in some ways, for sure. Because I can. Woo!
I'm asking because I've heard through the grapevine back when they were developing this that the Project Sigil people didn't like D&D Beyond. And so I was wondering like how much of this was really developed in a silo, because like if they built a whole new dice roller, what a waste of resources, right? Like if this is a whole different team, because D&D Beyond has a perfectly cromulent dice roller built in. It looks really nice. and it works. The physics work. It seems great. So I'm wondering if this is like a completely separate module that they built.
It all it does all feel different. I mean, all of the same information is here. I was actually quite impressed. I thought this was just going to be minis on a table, but like I'm clearly accessing the stat block. I didn't try to attach any of my characters to this.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely the character, like the inventory browser, it looks closer to Baldur's Gate 3 than D&D Beyond for sure. So did you just attack?
I just hit my ally. Apparently,
Oh,
friendly fire is allowed. Did I take it? And I did. Let's give him his health back.
oh no, Kurg. Okay,
Oh,
Kurg's fine.
Zerg. So there are pretty sweet animations in play. So I can take a monster, drop it in pretty easily. Bada boom. I mean, these came with the adventure. Whoops. But like I have a decent sampling of 3D figures, 3D minis here. Um, there's a bunch of tokens I can add, two-dimensional ones if I need them, and like it seems like it's everything in the basic rules I have access to in a flat. We can go make a mini, which I'm sure people will play with this for hours. Like I can straight up, hey, let's make an orc. Oh no, no, look away. But so I am in the dungeon master's seat right now. I can reveal the Ankeg, and it does stuff when it.
Oh,
Like
that's cool.
that's what I want an Ankeg to do.
Right.
Built an initiative. So only the characters that have been claimed are rolling right now. It's treating these guys as NPCs because no player grabbed them or I didn't grab them.
Mm.
The people in the bar aren't working. My orc is hidden right now to protect his modesty, I suppose.
That top top of the screen initiative bar is Baldur's Gate 3. It's exactly how they do it.
I mean, it feels like they'd be foolish not to just put out like the Baldur's Gate 3 mod. They already have, someone already has everybody saved.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I
did we
mean,
set damage?
on the main D&D Beyond channel the last few months, they've done multiple actual plays, 5e actual plays with the Baldur's Gate cast. They just released a new one yesterday. So they should have done these in 2023 when the game came out, but I mean, the better late than never. But they've done several of them over the last few months with the actor Neil, what's his face, who plays Astarion, and the woman who does Karlak, and the woman who does Lae'zel, with Brennan Lee Mulligan, Abria Iyengar, and some other people. They've really been leaning into that. The two main things I want to know is what is it like to import a D&D Beyond character, and what is it like to build? Can you build in this beta? Like, can you edit
You can
this
build.
tavern?
It's fairly limited. The assets that you have. All right, here we go. We're gonna break everything, but let's so I am not a subscriber. So I can only have one table at a time. Right now, this table is devoted to that adventure now. I don't know if that's just a beta thing, but I have to make a new table to get into the builder to like start blank. And I could be wrong, but in my limited experience, it wouldn't let me. I can add minis. I couldn't add like map level assets to that adventure. So here we are in a featureless void. So I can go put a floor down.
Yeah, this is what I'm most curious about: is how long does it take you to do this? Because
I'm gonna say it depends who you are. I don't like I'm not like super map guy, but I have seen where this is a brush and it's rotating so that this doesn't look so freaking cookie cutter, that floor texture. Like I didn't do a ton of it, and already I'm like, I really want to come back in and like overlay stuff so it doesn't look so, you know, you can change the fonts for 2 hours and never get anything done, right? It's one of those things. But they do have these chonky boy set pieces. So like,
okay,
boom,
that's good.
auto tower. I think I just laid down 2 of them accidentally. But like, we can play D&D right now. Here's the tower,
Yeah. So
and I can take it apart.
So it really is like playing with Dwarven Forge pieces, right? Or the WizKids Warlock pieces, right?
Yeah.
It's just like these. It's a virtual version of that.
Fred raises a very good question here. Will it crash as soon as you have 4 or 5 people playing on the Sigil 3D VTT? Probably. The beta version probably would. And after that, it probably depends on your graphics card and internet connection.
Yeah, I have an okay graphics card. I have upgraded my RAM. It works fine until I'm starting to stream it to you guys.
Yeah, but what I mean, so the once you add the demand of streaming it, right, it starts to bog down. But
Yeah,
how
and
is I'm curious to see how that's different than sharing it with 4 or 5 players, right?
It wouldn't be, right? Because I assume if you download it, you're hosting it, like you are the server. And then so you're broadcasting it to whoever your players are playing. So they're all viewing it like a stream.
Mm-hmm.
I could give you access to my table. In the very beginning, I fast forwarded through it because I didn't want anyone to join from the stream and destroy my computer even more. I hid the floor, which is interesting. Doesn't seem like something you'd want, but I guess for like traps and stuff. Yes, you could theoretically sign in and claim or build your own token. You could add your character. We could all be playing on this.
Twin Steel's asking about the minimum memory. I'm looking on the download page. It doesn't say anything. Yeah, there's nothing here about system requirements.
And it is, I mean, it's pretty smooth. Like the camera is pretty smooth. I don't have great proficiency with it because I've only been messing around with it for a couple hours. But it's WASD. You got spin. You can go to overhead if you want a little more of a classic feel, I suppose. But I think most people are going to be into the three dimensionality of it all. But it works very well. I am very uncomfortable with like this becoming the main thing people think about when they play D&D. And if I meet a stranger at the game shop, say, "Hey, do you want to play Dungeons and Dragons with me?" They think I'm going to spend hours constructing a three-dimensional space and tinkering with minis to create an adventure.
Yeah, I've already spent hours creating a 3-dimensional space in the real world right here in my game room, and this is the space that I want to play D&D in.
Right. So what you guys just said made me think that I would never. This doesn't interest me at all. I'm with Ryan. It looks pretty, and I have no interest in using it. But there is, I think there is a market for this. The market is the digital equivalent of the Dwarven Forge nerds. Digital Brad would like this a lot. Because there's that kind of person, the people who play Warhammer who enjoy the painting and the gluing more than the battles. There's the kind of person who's gonna, love building this stuff for hours and making castles and making worlds, and that's the kind of person who's gonna pay $9.99 a month or whatever for this. People who just like, I'm gonna make campaign worlds for someday. I'll run these someday. We all have that. We like to make maps and create NPCs we know we're probably never going to use. I think there is a market for that, but I'm not sure. It remains to be seen if the digital Dwarven Forge nerds are going to like this as much as the real life Dwarven Forge nerds dive into that. We'll have to see.
Yeah. Well, and I say that now, but as you were talking, Jim, I was remembering, was it Halo 3 that had the level editor where you could design your own levels to play arena games in? My son and I spent hours building our own Halo arenas.
Mm-hmm.
You take a map and then you layer a bunch of stuff on it and you kind of customize, oh, here's a room here and here's a tower there. And, we had a lot of fun just tinkering around with that. So, so maybe like there's probably a lot of people out there that are really going to like this.
Yeah. Nacho says, be upset if they increase the sub price to support this. Yeah, I would be too. Hopefully this becomes a separate thing. A separate thing that you would pay for, because I don't want to subsidize other people using me.
It feels very separate. Does anybody? I haven't been paying attention to chat either. Does anybody want me to poke around at anything before I stop my computer from having a meltdown? Any other questions
Get it in
about
now before Ryan's
Sigil?
computer explodes?
Ask me now before I go dark. It is connected to I did have to sign up through my D&D Beyond account, so it is in some sense integrated with D&D Beyond. I did not try to import a character sheet. I probably should have. I apologize. I don't want you to see my stuff. But it does feel very different. I don't feel like I'm interacting with D&D Beyond. I feel like I am playing a different game. And no judgments. I'm sorry if I came off like strong. That there's people who are going to love this, and there are going to be nights where I love this too. This isn't Dungeons and Dragons anymore to me. This is a different game, and a game I'll play if someone builds a cool thing. I think like all of the animated assets are really going to make or break it and be like the selling point for a lot of people. Like you cast Sacred Flame, Sacred Flame happens. My imagination's always going to do a better job, but that's because I don't know. I am gifted in that department in the sense that like I do have an internal eye, and I spent 30 years reading books and like practicing because I was from the Stone Age before the computer could do all my cool imagining for me. So I think this is going to do well if it's relatively stable. Which in beta, I'm streaming on a janky computer and it hasn't killed us all yet. Biggest monster or asset?
He's probably just trying to get you to crash your computer.
Yeah, I get it. So clearly these are a lot of these. I do find it interesting. Look at all the kobolds in different poses. Like sitting, standing, talking. So clearly there's a kobold chapter to this adventure.
It's low level. It's an introductory adventure though, right? There's probably not going to be.
Yeah, it's level 1. Creatures. You go to the basement. The gnome guy, the bartender goes to the basement. An oncake pops out. You go down there, and it turns out this bugbear is in charge of all the bugs now. I do have here's an aboleth.
Bugbear Bugmaster.
Bugbear Bugmaster riding a scorpion. Like it's pretty dope. I mean, if I didn't know anything about D&D and you show me like, yeah, there's a dude riding a scorpion covered in skulls, it's like, oh, all right, that's dope. I'll play this game. I'll see what this is all about.
Yeah.
Fred asked about an ancient dragon mini. Well, I did get a dragon mini for pre-ordering the books, and I sent Ryan the code. I don't know if he had time to.
I vacillated. I went back and forth. I'm not going to claim it because it's going to serve someone else better.
Okay.
I don't think I'm going to use this much, so I'd rather that go to someone who's going to use it. But I appreciate the offer.
Sure. So, I mean, if you out there like Project Sigil and you want a free dragon mini, I could hook you up with that. That's something I could do.
Yeah, well, to quote Ryan from our earlier discussion off stream, this is the coolest version of a thing that I don't really want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I feel that way. But as we're talking, I'm also thinking about people who might really like this, right? Like, imagine people who live in big cities, right? Like, I have a friend who lives in Korea, right? He doesn't have space for all of his D&D stuff. All his D&D stuff is still in storage until he moves back to the States. It's there's a lot of people who don't have a game room, don't have a big house with a big enough kitchen table to be able to host games, right? So this is a way to have a virtual tabletop, right? So I could see people in that capacity finding real value to this, because if I had it to do all over again, if I hadn't already spent all the money on all the crap behind me, right, I could just buy a really nice computer and do it all virtually.
Yeah. That's a good point. So anything else here? Or are we ready to give Ryan a break so he can finally shut this down?
This is the closest thing to a castle that's available to us cheap fellas. Someone in chat asked if there were castles.
All right.
Can layer elements and stuff, but yeah, I'm getting out of here. I'm getting out of here.
Yeah, we've got a million more things to talk about. So moving on, the next thing that we're going to talk about is out of nowhere, like 2 days ago, Wizards of the Coast put out new UA. They first described it as Eberron updates. It's mostly a new artificer. There was a UA artificer just a few months ago, and they've revised it a little bit, and they've included a new subclass called the Cartographer, and there are a bunch of feats. The Eberron stuff is there are Eberron specific feats for dragon marked houses. So where do we want to start? Is it
just circling back to the conversation with Mike Merles? He was like, "Is anyone working on D&D trying to make it fun?" And oh geez, I forget her name, but the designer on the video introducing this new artificer subclass clearly wakes up every morning trying to think of ways to make D&D more fun.
It's Mackenzie Armis.
Mackenzie. Her energy was infectious, and she was clearly psyched. And I was just like, you know what? Yeah, I want to play a cartographer now. Like, I'm on board. You've sold me. Let's go.
Yeah, and I'm assuming this is playtest material for the new Eberron product that we're going to be getting later this year, right? That's the expectation. There's an Eberron product on the short list of 2025 books, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're definitely still leaning into Eberron. And here are the specific things that are changed. Tinker's Magic now gives the mending cantrip, so you get mending for free. It's not even on the artificer spell list anymore. And items created with the feature last until you finish a long rest, where this is kind of interesting because one of the items you could create was a bedroll, but it would only last for an hour. So that isn't very useful to make a bedroll, and then you wake up and why am I cold? Replicate magic items tables have been revised. Magic item tinker has been expanded to allow you to recharge magic items by expending spell slots and transforming magic items from one to the other, which is very interesting. Soul of Artifice lets you disintegrate any number of items to increase the number of regained hit points, so you can do more things with the magic items that you create through your daily stuff. I am not as well versed at the Artificer as I think either of you are, so who wants to give us their initial thoughts here, or tell us what we should talk about specifically?
I mean, I'm I like the idea that there's a different subclass with a different feel to it. Like cartographer just sounds cool to me. But I I'm I don't know. I've had I think 3 different players play artificer, and they've always been clunky at best. Like that's the nicest way I could say anything about the artificer. So I don't know. I don't know what to expect from this if the new version is going to run, any better than the old one.
It's definitely not a beginner class, is it?
No.
There is significant bookkeeping.
What if we gave a wizard an associate's degree in mechanical engineering? A complicated class to play.
So one of the things I saw before is that where is it? Level. Oh, spell storing item has more restrictions, whereas before spell storing items you could very easily be exploited, but there are now restrictions like once a creature uses the object to produce the spell's effect, it can't be used this way again. It's the start of the creature's next turn. Because I saw some stuff online, exploits about using an item, then you just pass it to the guy next to you.
Right, because it didn't require attunement, so you could. We went over this in one of our shows, right, where you could make like a whole bunch of homunculuses, and then hand your spell storing item one to the next.
Yeah,
and you could just spam fireball with it.
So that's good that they've closed off that loop. But I do want to talk a little bit about the cartographer. I think this is kind of cool. It's kind of interesting. It's sort of like a like a ranger tinker kind of, because it definitely has that sort of pathfinding, wayfinding, rangery kind of stuff to it, but it's all done through magical implements and that sort of stuff. And look, you get tool proficiencies, cartographer spells, adventures atlas, scouting gadgets. You get a lot of stuff at level 3. Some of this stuff is the adventures atlas is a very cool feature where you can basically make a magical map and give it to somebody, and then you always know where that person is. And they can add 1d4 to their initiative rolls. There's some pretty cool stuff you could do with that at higher levels too. This subclass is incredibly focused on movement. Starting at level 3, you essentially get a free disengage every single round for free. It just costs you basically 5 feet of movement speed. Because if you have 30 feet of movement speed, you teleport 10 feet away, teleport 10 feet for 15-foot cost, then you still have 15 feet left. So you can move 25 feet, but you can disengage as long as you're not grappled, because you can't do it if your speed's 0. But as long as you're not grappled, you can disengage for free every single turn, which is crazy. Very powerful.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Like if the final version of this artificer, like you got one subclass that makes a better ranger than the ranger, you got one subclass that makes a better blaster than a sorcerer, you got one subclass that's better than a wizard in some other way. Like that'd be great design.
Yeah, go ahead.
My whole take on Eberron, and Artificer is part of this, and I think you remove the Artificer from Eberron, and you get a lot of tension in the system. It gets real janky real fast. You put this guy, I have the Marauders map and a jetpack and a cannon or a mechanical spider that I ride into battle. Then like, okay, cool, we're playing a different game now. And I don't mind that game. Like I've sat at Eberron tables and it's been a blast. And it's a pretty interesting thought process. Okay, all of these magic items exist, all of these spells exist. What would civilization look like? What would war look like? It's almost more in line with the rules of 5e than Forgotten Realms baseline vanilla 5e is in a lot of ways, world building wise. But the two clash. Because like I already see people taking like the dragon mark feats, like this is overpowered and like I could take this and put it on my other thing and it'll do all this stuff. That's like only in Eberron, like not at my table, please. It fundamentally changes the game. It's cool, but it's a different. You're playing a different setting. You're playing a different game, and I wish they would hit that harder because I'm gonna have a player in a year find one of these features on D&D Beyond to be like, can I do like I cast explosive grappling hook cannonball? It's like what? And then we got to spend 10 minutes figuring out where it came from. Oh, it's Eberron. No, please and thank you. Sorry, pick another spell now or whatever. I wish they had better organizational skills on this side of the thing.
Did the Dragonlance book that came out a couple years ago have Dragonlance only feats? It had some feats in it, right? But I don't know if they were Dragonlance campaign only because I highlighted this here on the screen. I think it's very interesting. They're saying with these dragon marks, it says prerequisite Eberron campaign. And I'm wondering if they enforce that. I'm wondering, one, if this is the first time this has been done, because I don't recall seeing this before. And two, if they can enforce this on D&D Beyond. Because that's part of the big issue, is it's pretty easy to segment these things when you're playing with physical books at a table, and you can say you can use stuff from these books, but online D&D Beyond historically hasn't done a very good job of separating all this stuff, and it just looks like it's all just a bunch of feats from one big pool. So I'd be curious to see if that's built in.
Yeah, I think that needs to be something that is smoothly integrated into D&D Beyond. And that would free up design space too, right? Because as a game designer, I'm sure they don't want to have to like double check all the different stuff that they put out, right? You want to be able to say, okay, I'm going to make a Dragonlance book that is all going to be compatible with the core rules. I'm going to make a Eberron book and it's all going to be compatible with the core rules. I don't want to have to balance my Dragonlance stuff against my Eberron stuff against my Spelljammer stuff. That's a whole lot of extra work as a designer, right? So I think, this is actually a really good addition of saying prerequisite, Eberron campaign setting, and having a toggle on D&D Beyond to be able to turn those on and off. That would actually be good design, both from a software point and a game design standpoint, right? And the Pathfinder community is a pretty good example of that. When I don't know about playing Pathfinder 2 because I haven't played much Pathfinder 2, but when the few times I played Pathfinder 1, when you get an invite to a campaign, there's usually a qualifier of, these are the books we're going to use for this campaign. You get a short list, 3 or 4 books that you can use to build your character because there's so much Pathfinder content out there that was a pretty standard, acceptable way to invite people to your game.
I thought that was in the D&D space too, but it seems to have become vestigial. Like I don't know. I thought that was like the common practice, and now it's like every time I'm like, we're only going to use the 2024 PHB. Everyone's like, really? What? You do that? It's like, yeah, come on. Yes, please. Thank you.
Well, and I assume that's a side effect of D&D Beyond because, like, I have multiple casual players at my table who they don't know the difference. They pull up D&D Beyond, they're like, "Oh, here's this cool feat where I can, wield, two-handed weapons at the same time." I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's a homebrew thing. Let's click off the homebrew setting.
And having turned off 2014, like unchecking legacy content in 2 different places and then still having it come up on the character sheet, like I don't trust that unchecking I'm hopeful, I guess, but I'm afraid that checking off like no Eberron content, still someone's going to show up with this like dragon mark. And it's like, that means you work for a company and you're associated with this lineage and you have this house and there's like consequences to that, and none of that stuff exists in this world. And just crap.
Yeah. Nacho mentions here that you can pick which books you share, and that's true. But if they own the book, there's nothing you can do about it. And D&D Beyond wants to sell your players the books too. Definitely, that's so they get you in there by the DM buys everything, and then you can play for free. And then when you see a cool feat there, they want you to buy it. You used to be able to buy them a la carte. A la carte disappeared. We don't know why. I don't think they ever said anything. I don't think they ever commented on the disappearance of the a la carte D&D Beyond options. Do we want to talk about the individual feats or any of that kind of, or any of the magic items or any of that stuff? Or I'm not
When there's
extremely well versed on the new UA
there's
yet.
I forget which one it is now, but there's one that is clearly there's a best one, which means it is an imbalanced UA.
Mm.
There's one where like you can use it to create a better version, like kind of what we were saying with like the artificer could be a better wizard slash sorcerer slash ranger, depending on the subclass you choose, slash like paladin tank. We can get our AC up to 1 billion. Um,
Yeah. I feel like we're kind of beating up on Eberron here, but I mean, to be honest, it's never been my favorite setting. Like I think it's cool. Like if somebody invited me to play a game in an Eberron setting, I would be happy to play an Eberron. There's elements of Eberron that I definitely like, but it's not something that I'm going to DM. That's just my preference. So
Yeah, I've shared my thoughts on Eberron before. I love it in principle, but there are 12 dragon marked houses, and that is too many things to learn to run. It's too many. I've tried to read the book 4 or 5 times, and as soon as I get to that, I'm out. Can't do it. I love the idea of Eberron. It sounds so cool, though. It sounds really cool. Anyway, we should probably move on because we still have multiple things to get to. It is a news explosion. All right. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, here is from the finished book. There's been a range of analyses of the monster manual. Blog of Holding did one that was pretty good, but there's some infographics here that are pretty interesting. Not all of them. I'm going to skip past some stuff. Figure number 1, modest general increase in attack bonus. The 2014 is the blue line, and the orange is 2024. Attack bonus is largely the same, except when we get to higher levels. Figure number 2, spell DCs mostly the same, except for high CR. You can see, look at that. Look at that. It's crazy spell DC for the highest challenge rating creatures, but there's not a big sample size up there, right? There's like 2 creatures at that CR.
Those outliers will get you.
Then when we get to figure 3, this is where the information starts to get interesting. This is DPR, right? Yeah, figure 3 is DPR. So essentially, once you get to CR 10, the DPR increase is stratospheric compared to 2014 monsters. So that's pretty interesting. And then that DPR split out between legendary creatures. These are the ones with the squares, and non-legendary creatures. Those are the ones with the dots. So legendary creatures start at CR5, go up to CR30. You can see the DPR per round is crazy high for legendary creatures. And when I first was thinking about this, because we've known this, legendary creatures hit harder. They've been saying that for 6 months, right? They've been saying legendary creatures are going to hit harder. And my first thought was like, why not just make every creature hit harder in the same sort of way? But the more I think about it, I think that having legendary creatures hit harder is one way they're trying to rebalance high-level D&D. Because, if we've all run intense combats before, the purpose of a legendary monster is that it's supposed to be able to take actions off its turn so it can fight a full party. But we never run that, right? You always run a legendary creature with some helper monsters, right? Like your dragon's going to have a mage to cast counterspell and some brutes to go in first. Like, but I think if you have legendary creatures that hit much harder, you can run them with fewer helper monsters.
Mhm.
And so it makes them easier to run and makes combats go quicker because it's the proliferance of abilities and turns that makes high level D&D such a slog. And so if you can remove those helper monsters, things go faster. Even with legendary actions, maybe even more legendary actions, you're essentially moving that utility from multiple stat blocks into one stat block, one token on the battlefield, one mini. So I don't know. Thoughts so
Yeah.
far on the first few that we've covered?
Well, and the counterbalance of that is true as well, right, Jim? If you just increased all monsters' damage output significantly, then that would limit your options to do hordes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if all the monsters had a significant increase, you're not going to be able to throw, 10 goblins at a party at the same time, right? So by keeping the non-legendary creatures in more of a mid-range of damage output, it allows you to outnumber your player characters without, dramatically, threatening them.
Right.
And looking at this, I see them fixing the problems that we've all discovered over a decade of playing 5e because of that dip at what CR quarter, CR half. Like that's also a life improving change where you're not smoking level 1 characters right out of the gate,
Mm-hmm.
and then everything's hitting harder. And in my experience running the first 5-10 levels of 2024 a couple times now, I mean, I only just got the monsters actually, but they are hitting harder. Even at lower levels, you feel the shift. There's a little bit more to the monsters, and they're more keeping pace. I think that the fact that we're going up to CR 30 here, whereas most tables are probably peaking at 12 to 15, that the scale is shifting because of that too. I think it would seem more impactful if we broke this down into tiers as well. Like the tier 1 gap would be closer to the tier 2 gap, tier 3 gap. And then tier 4 is bananas because tier 4 was just not challenging.
Yeah. All right. So moving on. Um, like most things, incremental increases to armor class for most creatures, and then figure 7 is the next interesting one. This, I am confused. This giant orange thing here means that 44 creatures lost Constitution save proficiency, and 59 creatures lost Charisma saving throw proficiency. These are creatures that existed in both 2014 and 2024. You can see some gain new proficiencies in strength, dex, but mostly they have fewer proficiencies, which I find this interesting. Why do you guys think that too many creatures had con saves and charisma saves? Or why this what how does this change help rebalance the game?
I have a pet theory, and it's not super reasoned out, but I think save or suck spells are a big part of the game, especially at medium to high level play, and feel real bad when they don't go off. They change the face of combat. Someone already mentioned banish, right? Like banish is huge. All right, we're gonna take this guy off the map. Oh, it didn't work. I just spent my spell slot and my turn. And especially when that first comes online, I'm like, you got one of those a day. And it feels real bad if it doesn't click. So I think this is more a vibes based choice than a math
Hmm.
based choice. Because everybody knows screw the DM, right?
Yeah.
Well, and most players, they want, when it comes to cantrips, they want the cantrips where they roll a hit versus where the creature rolls a save, because most of the time you're going to hit more often if you're rolling to hit than if the DM is rolling the saving throw.
Yeah.
you know, and but then when you have your spells that still deal damage even when the creature fails a saving throw, right? Then you want the opposite. You want to cast, fireball over scorching ray, because you're going to most likely deal more damage. Because even if they fail, they're still going to take some. But then, like Ryan's saying, then you've got those other, like, the exact opposite of what save or suck used to be, right? In previous editions, you know, like we used to use that phrase in previous editions for the exact opposite effect. When it, like, a player would fail a saving throw and now they're dead, right? Or fail a saving throw and now they're out of commission for the rest of the combat. So I think you're right that it's about that disappointing feeling you get when you waste a spell slot and it does nothing.
One thing we can't see here is a comparison between the gaining or losing of charisma saves and creatures that used to be humanoids that are now fey. Or creatures that changed, because more fey they're going to have that innate
immune charm,
innate ability. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, and the other thing with changing the creature types, right, is like that makes, like, protection from good and evil far more useful than it used to be. And it makes, like, your charm person and hold person, right, that makes the calm emotions, like, it makes all of those spells less effective.
Yeah.
So
but yeah, banish is definitely up the list, as well as just charm person, or even friends. Friends got a bump in 5.5. You didn't know it when you got the player's handbook, but you know it now. Friends got Friends is OP in 5.5.
Friends is a trap. I roll everything in the open all the time, and I only occasionally regret it.
I'm right there with Ryan. Yep, I roll out in the open.
I tend to roll big things out in the open, but generally behind the screen. I like the mystique. I like the mystique, and part of it is because I would always roll, like, perception checks, secret. So if I'm rolling in the open, then all of a sudden I roll in the secret, the players know what I'm doing. So I'd rather they just not see me do it at all, so they don't know that it's happening. But if it's something big, if everyone at the table is hanging on to what's going on, yeah, you gotta roll in the open. You gotta. Everybody's got to see the dice land. So there was a couple other of these figures here I wanted to show. Number 10. Hit points are mostly static, except for legendary creatures. But you see there has been a pretty significant drop around CR5 of hit points. And I think this is good. We don't want everyone to have a ton more hit points, right? That just makes combat take longer. But legendary creatures, if we're going with the theory that they're trying to improve high-level D&D and make solo monsters a more legitimate threat, yeah, give them more hit points. We're giving them more hit points anyway. We were already doing that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. Do you want to say something about that, Brad?
Well, I was going to say, a lot of the time, giving the creature more hit points just slows the combat down. I'm much more in favor of increasing the monster's damage output and not increasing the hit points, so that it hits really hard on round 1 or 2 and then dies by round 3. Like that. Yeah. That creates a far more interesting combat than, the combat that takes 5 rounds, but the last 2 rounds is like, we already know who wins. We already know who's going to win, and now everybody's burnt their spell slots, and then we're just whittling things down with cantrips. That makes rounds 4 and 5 really anticlimactic.
Yeah. And there is one last figure here. A lot of math. Initiative. Holy crap, look at this.
Yeah.
This is, we might, if we probably won't have time, but we might talk about this more in a few minutes. But there has been look at that difference in initiative bonus, and this is, I feel like, an awesome new feature of the monster manual is giving creatures better initiative bonuses. Because I don't know about you, but I feel like initiative, when I roll initiative for monsters, they always are terrible,
Mhm.
just always terrible. And so even some of these higher CR creatures have initiative bonuses of like plus 18, plus 20. It's crazy. And so this is
And
a. Go ahead, Brian.
I was about to say, if I go from like CR 1/4 to like 12 to even 15, it's a pretty flat line in 2014.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've been using static initiative for a couple of years now. Like I switched that up to make my game go faster. And it worked out great because it works out so fast that we can roll initiative every round.
Mm.
Because basically what I do is I say, B to 15, right? 15 or higher, right? And then everybody rolls, and then I say, okay, fast round players go. So I don't even have to know what their number is. They roll and determine if they're on the fast round or the slow round, whether they're going before the monster or after the monster, right? And that just has dramatically sped up my combats. And now in the monster manual, monsters have a static initiative number next to the modifier. And I've found that when I do the static initiative thing, about half of my players, I usually set my static initiative, anywhere between like 12 and 16. And consistently, about half of the players go before the monster, half of the players go after the monster. And it makes for much, much more interesting and dynamic combats that way.
Is that fast round, slow round thing from Index Card RPG?
I don't know. I got the static number idea from Index RPG where they do the room number. Like everything in the room is this number difficulty.
Yeah.
Everything in the next room is this number difficulty, and you typically increase that number the deeper you go in the dungeon.
This Daggerheart stole that, and that's one thing I like about Daggerheart is that every creature has a difficulty number, and anything persuading them, hitting them, banishing them, it's all related to. It's like one save DC makes it way easier. You don't even have to look at it. But yeah, anything else to say here about initiative? I think the point we were gonna maybe discuss this, probably we don't have time now, was just that this is one of the sneaky ways that they have improved monsters, and it's not something that you would normally think about because monsters going higher in initiative order means they're gonna get more attacks before they die.
Mm-hmm.
Your monsters are gonna die round 3, 4, 5, whatever, regardless. But where they go in initiative order overall helps determine the total number of attacks they're going to be able to make in the action economy. This is something that's why newcomers are always like, I want to go low in initiative. I want to see what everybody else does. It's like, it's hard to explain this. Like, if you go lower, you overall get a lower number of attacks, but it doesn't feel like that. It just feels like it's going around in circles.
Yeah. It's clear. Like, especially, if you're watching Tree at Monk or D4 Deep Dive, like, even Teos Abadia's his videos, all these guys are breaking down the math of this new edition, and it's just better. Like, they've done a much better job with the math. Alpha Stream, that's the name of his. They've just done a much better job with this edition and designing the game. So it is a good edition of D&D.
Mr. Vincent, it's okay that you're late. We are going to ask you to stay after and clean the whiteboards, please. All right. So anything else to say there about the last thing we were talking about? Monster Manual? See, I already forgot what we were talking about. I'm so focused on the future, everyone. It's gone already behind me. Here's a little thing. Okay, we're gonna Actually, let's can we pop by Jim's Corner real quick?
Oh,
So I just started watching this new show on Apple TV. Well, it's not new. It's a show on. It's new to me, right? Called Foundation, based on some sci-fi novels of Isaac Asimov. I'm only a few episodes in so far. Really good. But anyway, this isn't really a spoiler because it's like the first scene of the show. But the show begins. You see this like obelisk on a wasteland kind of planet. And then you see it's on a hill, and there's all these little flags in the ground below it on this hill. And then you see some kids, and they've got flags in their hands, and they're like, I'm going to go first. No, you go first. No, you go first. And the kids are trying to approach the obelisk. And as you get close to the obelisk, we find out it projects this like psychic wah, 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 wah. If you get too close, you pass out. So it's a tradition among these peoples. It's like a challenge to see who can plant their flag closest to the obelisk. And when I saw that, I was like, I would love to steal that for a D&D campaign. Because, you know, the weird obelisk shows up on the edge of town is a great plot all by itself, right? So in Foundation, this obelisk has been there for hundreds of years, and everybody just kind of ignores it now. It's just kind of like part of the scenery. So what if your players stroll into a town, or they hear about the next town over where there's some kind of weird festival going on around this obelisk, where they play games like maybe they could play some kind of ball game where they bounce a ball off the field of the obelisk to try to hit it into a net. You know, you could do all kinds of stuff like it's a great way to hook people into whatever your plot device is. In this case, it's an obelisk. And so they're in a town. These kids are talking about how they're saving their money so they can go do the obelisk challenge in the town, you know, the next town over. And that's a way to bring up the information to the player. So I don't know. I saw that and I thought, this is fantastic. I'm definitely going to steal this. And I wanted the world to know it. Oh, here, I have a picture. That's the obelisk in the show.
Yep. It's on top of the hill. So like as they're trying to get close to it, they're climbing the hill, which makes the whole scene a little more dramatic, right?
Yeah.
It's a cool scene. I love the idea of thinking about world building in that way. Yeah, you know, so when you take the fantastical and the weird and you do all this, you know, fantasy stuff, but then you reinterpret it through the view of the average citizen, like the average person living in this world. They don't know why this thing is here. They don't know, you know, that there's other planes of existence out there, right? It's something that the players know because they played the game before, and that the characters will figure out along the way. But it's interesting world building, like a, you know, thought experiment to think about, you know, what if there's a portal to another plane here? And then what does that mean to the people that live nearby? How does that impact them? And that's one of the things I really liked about 5th edition monster design was the regional effects of a monster. And so what if you take the regional effects of a monster and then incorporate that into the superstitions of the villagers, the festivals of the villagers, the habits of the people who live in this area are all impacted because this monster does something to the land around them, right? And I think those are just really great thought experiments and can lead to really interesting world building and also interesting encounter design.
Yeah, you know, your culture's traditions don't seem weird to you, but they seem weird to everyone else. They seem perfectly normal to you.
Little details like that, like what are the kids doing, right? What's the stupid kids game? Just makes the world feel so lived in. Like
Right.
in the entrance to the Sunless Citadel, actually, which we might be talking about again soon. It's like there's a pit in the ground, and the players are almost definitely going to like search around to look for tracks or whatever. And I always have them find like fantasy beer bottles and like class of 846 rules, like because like this is where the high school kids would go drink. Like think about what's the
Nice.
spookiest place in your hometown. You went there and hung out when you were like 17 years old.
Oh, that's giving me ideas, right? Like, you know, there's the new Revenant that's like in
The house?
it's not the house, but the one that's in the entire graveyard,
Mm.
right? Like this, the whole graveyard is one creature. Like, what if there's a spot in the world that, where this living graveyard, the entire graveyard has become this undead entity, and what does that do with the surrounding, villagers? Obviously they don't, traffic doesn't go through there, but are there games the kids play, like, the teenagers, like, how brave am I? Can I get close to this thing? Are there like sacrifices made to it to try to appease Orcus or some, whatever they believe is behind this? There's some cool design elements that brings up in my head.
Yeah, that's a fun thing to think about, is the teenagers, because teenagers are going to look for ways to get into trouble. So how are teenagers getting in trouble in your town or your part of the campaign world? There's probably a good plot hook there, because whatever they're getting into is probably dangerous and a bad idea and something that should be handled by adventurers instead.
And in a world with fantasy races that live for centuries, like your 15-year-old boys exist for much longer on the time scale.
Oh God! Oh
Right?
God! Elven adolescence. Like, what kind of festivals do elves celebrate at the beginning of adolescence and then the end of adolescence, and what kind of trouble do they get up in the 40 years in between?
So there are several other things we could talk about, but I don't know if we really have time to get into anything, because as the clock turns, our show must end.
Profound.
Wow. Yeah, I wanted to make sure we brought it down to a somber tone.
Happy Friday, everybody.
Happy
Enjoy your
Friday,
weekend.
everybody. Hey,
Cheers.
anybody got anything interesting coming up? Anything you guys want to plug here at the end?
I just dropped a new video yesterday, and it's totally inspired by Casual Friday from 2 weeks ago. The conversation we had with Peter from Tales Elsewhere. That conversation totally inspired an adventure design, and I crammed it all into one video and got it out by Thursday of this week.
Speaking of Peter from Tales from Elsewhere, he was on D20 Questions and stuck around for Explosive Creation this week, so check it out. He is got a very creative mind and is building like a horror Cthulhu-y Weird West game, so it was very fun to like occupy that space. There's a lot of rich territory there that in your vanilla fantasy you don't get to use as much. Good times.
And I just want to say, if you're not watching Severance, you should.
Mm.
I'm
That's
almost
why
caught up. And
that's why I have a heart out. I have to go watch Severance.
I think I watched the whole first season again to prepare, and some of the twists got me again. I'd completely forgotten. I was like, no, it's crazy. Severance is very good. Anyway, and so I think that's probably about all for us, and we appreciate you watching. And now you know what? You're free to do whatever you want with the rest of your day. You have our blessing. Go do whatever you want. So until next time, I am GM Jim. That guy is...
I'm Brad Wolf from Dire Den.
And I'm Ryan Doyle. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you again soon.